So last week I sent out an email in which I shared a strategy for avoiding the 4/8 bar loop trap, which is what I call it. So what do I mean by this? Well, often when we as producers start a track, we'll do something like this. We might put down a drum beat. This is our hypothetical drum beat. And then we might add in a bass line. We might then add some chords, maybe a melody, and maybe some other bits and pieces like effects. And we've got this loop and we keep playing this and it sounds good and we listen to it for a long time, but then we're stuck. We're stuck and we don't know how to get out, and we save the project and the next day we just move on to another one because we don't know how to turn it into a song. And so what happens is we rack up a bunch of these loop projects on our computer and they never get finished, and that sucks. So we want to avoid this trap, and the strategy that I sent out in the email, and if you haven't seen it, check the last email that I sent and there's a link in there to read that, also below this video. In that email, the strategy was to work on the songwriting or composition first. So instead of building this loop, I would come in and maybe work on a chord like this. And then I'd work on the verse. Same chord progression, add in a little bit more, work on the chorus. All the way through, so I have this full arrangement pretty much just with a single instrument like a piano. Now this is really helpful because once I've got this in place, this is kind of the heavy lifting. I've got the chords, I've got the bass line, I've got the melody sorted. So all I need to do now is add in the instruments, and I'm not getting stuck in this loop trap. So that's the basic strategy. But in today's video, I want to share three things. I want to go over three different parts to this because this strategy isn't actually that easy. If you don't know how to write good chords or good melodies, it's going to be tough for you. So the first thing I want to go over is how to write good chord progressions and melodies without relying on inspiration or a mass of theory knowledge. You do need some, but you don't need to know everything. The second thing I want to do is talk about transforming a simple idea into multiple ideas, which is kind of the cornerstone of this strategy. You've got your simple chord progression. How do you take that and turn it into something else for your verse or for your chorus or maybe your bridge? Finally, I want to go over what I think is the shortcut to good arrangement. It's how to get 80% of your song done in 2 hours or less than 2 hours. And after that, I'm just going to go through a few questions that you guys asked from the previous email. There's just 3 of them. Go over those quickly, and that'll be the end of the video. So let's start with the chord progression. Well, how do you write good chord progressions and melodies without relying on inspiration? The first thing, like I mentioned, is music theory helps. So if you don't know any theory at all, make sure you learn some. We have a introductory module in EDM Foundations that people have said is the best explanation of music theory they've ever heard or seen. So check that out if you're an EDM Foundations customer. If you're not, worth checking out the course, especially if you're a newer producer. You can check that out at edmfoundations.com. Theory helps here. Other resources out there as well to check out. The second thing is keep it simple. So one way I like to start a chord progression is like this. I'll just copy this out and then delete these MIDI clips. So I'll create a MIDI clip, and then I normally start with the bass line. And this is something you can do regardless of whether you have good theory knowledge or not. It does help if you have a good ear. If you've played an instrument in the past, this will be easier for you. So let's say we're writing an A minor to keep things simple, or the white keys. And I'll just start by laying down a bass line. And I'll mute that so I get a horrible clashing sound. And then I might think, you know, it would sound good if I went up to C. and then maybe down to G. And then maybe down again to F. And so I've got my bass line, then I can just add voices on top of this. This is one easy way to build chord progressions. So now I might go up to the 5th. And again, you're just doing this by ear. And I'm going to turn off this MIDI device. And then we'll go up to the 5th here as well. Nah, that's sounding fine, but it's a little bit boring. So let's add in some other stuff. Maybe make this a 7th. And there we go. We've got a nice chord progression. Simple, but it sounds good. So that's nice. Now, what about melodies? I mean, it's hard to write a catchy melody, right? Normally it is. So what I tell people when they ask about, how do I write a catchy melody? How do I write a good melody? Or I'm struggling with this. It does come down to practice. It's not something that you can just pick up a few tactics on and then automatically write good melodies. You're going to need to listen to a lot of music. You're going to need to work on it a lot. But there are a few things I want to mention when it comes to writing melodies. The first one is to start simple. A lot of people struggle with this because they try and create something that sounds complex or detailed or amazing straight away, and that's not the best approach, I think. First of all, because if you're trying to write something complex, that's not always great. It's not always going to be catchy if it's complex. The best melodies are simple. Now, obviously, it depends on what kind of music you're making, but if you're making kind of mainstream electronic music, you want to keep the melody somewhat simple. So let's do this now. Let's start with something simple, and I'm going to explain some of these concepts as I go along. So and a lot of this is just listening to the gaps. I've got this note down, and I can kind of hear in my head where I want it to go next. So that's a really simple melody. And I'm just going to move this up a little bit so you can kind of see better. So the first thing to note, and I'm not going to go too in depth in this because melody writing is a big topic, but one thing you want to understand is chord tones and non-chord tones. So if you don't know what those are, a chord tone is a note, the melody note that's being played in the chord as well. So in this case, we have an E, and it's also in the chord. So this is a chord tone. Basically what that means is it's going to sound more consonant with the chord. It's going to sound nicer. It's going to sound more comfortable. Over here, though, we have a D, which is a non-chord tone. You don't find it below, but it's actually more of a weaker note, you could call it that, because it's not being played at the same time or on the downbeat of the chord. So it doesn't sound as dissonant. I'll show you what I mean. We listen to this. That D doesn't sound out of place, but if we put the D on the downbeat, it would sound a little bit more dissonant. Right? So we've got a mix of chord tones and non-chord tones here. This again is a non-chord tone, and that helps create tension going into here. And you can hear this is a non-chord tone, so again we get a lot of tension. If we were to just end the melody here, it wouldn't sound good. Non-chord tone again. So we've actually got 4 non-chord tones in a row. And so when we hit this part, we feel safe again. And then we've got chord tones at the end. Now another thing that helps make melodies good and catchy is a mixture of stepwise and skipwise motion, which I haven't got a lot of what's called skipwise motion here. So a stepwise motion is when you go like this. You're going from an A, you got to the next note in the scale like this, right? That's stepwise motion. Skipwise motion would be going from the A to the D, maybe down to the G, and then up to the B. We're skipping out a lot of notes here. So if we look at this, we've got mostly stepwise motion. It's just going, and that might make our melody a bit boring. So we might want to add something into this. We've got skipwise motion here. So there's a few things we could do to add in some skipwise motion and make this more interesting. I don't like that note there, so I think I'm just going to leave that. And one other thing you can do is add some slight variation to turn this 4-bar melody into an 8-bar melody. So if we look at this now, it's just the same, but we could change something up. Maybe we go. Start on the D, so there's a bit more tension there. And then we just end on that long C. So few things there for melody writing. Start simple, start really simple. And if you can get it sounding good simple, then the variation and the complexity that you add is likely to work better. Instead of trying to make something complex straight away, it will just complicate things. Non-chord tones and chord tones, use a mix. Stepwise and skipwise motion, use a mix. And use that simple technique to turn the 4-bar melody into the 8-bar melody if you want. Don't force this. If a 4-bar melody works just fine, don't turn it into an 8-bar melody unless you need to add a bit more variation in your song. Now, one more thing on melodies. I mentioned EDM Foundations before. When you sign up to the complete package, you also get a copy, or you also get enrolled in our melody writing masterclass. This is about an hour-long masterclass where you'll learn how to write better melodies. It explains these concepts I mentioned in more detail, and it's taught by Connor, who is much better at writing melodies than I am. So check that out if you like. Again, edmfoundations.com. Moving on, how do you transform a simple idea into multiple ideas? So let's just remove this melody here. Actually, no, we'll keep it. We'll keep it. We've got this simple idea here, pretty simple. And let's say this is our verse. All right, so we're kind of ignoring this stuff here. We've got a chord progression. We've got a melody. How do we transform this and make it work in different sections of the song? Again, we don't want to fall into this loop trap. We don't just want to go like this and then get stuck just tweaking one thing. So we want to change the composition, the core composition of this, and make some variants. So the first thing I would say, so the easiest tactic here is to simplify. So let's say this is our verse. Well, maybe we want 2 sections to the verse like I've got here. So I don't really like the first part of this melody. I don't like the ring at the end, or the roll, fill, whatever you call it. So I'm actually going to simplify this in the first section. So maybe I don't want the melody playing. Or maybe I just want some notes, so like this. Right? And then we launch into this. Just gonna lower the velocity here. Right? So that's one way to add some variation. In the intro, I might not have the melody at all, any of the notes. And I might also remove a voice or two from here. So I might do, you know what, I don't want the C here. I don't want this B either. And so now I've got some variation between the intro and the verse. So they sound like distinct sections. So that is the first thing, simplify for different sections. If you've got an already kind of complex idea, you can do this very easily. Now the second thing is to reharmonize the melody. So let's say we want a different chord progression for our chorus, but we want to keep the same melody. Well, how would we do that? Let me just pull back so I've got the original melody. There we go. I'm going to stick with a 4-bar melody here. So we've got this, but we want to change it up so it sounds different to the verse. Well, we could make or write a new chord progression underneath this. And normally what I do is delete everything so I'm not influenced by what I've already written. So instead of starting on the A, we might go up to the 5th, starting the E instead. You get the idea. We're taking that melody and we're putting another chord progression underneath. Now, a kind of reversal of that tactic is to do the opposite. So taking our chord progression and writing a new melody over the top for the chorus. So we would just delete this and then write something new. And so what we're doing here is we're not starting from scratch again. We're not going, oh, cool, I've got this verse chord progression and this melody. Now I need to work on my chorus. I need to do this whole process all over again. That's time consuming. No, you can take what you've written and just modify it a little bit, add some new stuff in, and get some great results. So the final thing I wanted to talk about before we get to the questions is the shortcut to a good arrangement. This is how I often get 80% of a song written in less than 2 hours. Now, this is a really simple technique. I've talked about it a lot before, so you've probably heard of it. But basically what we do is we use a reference track to define or influence our arrangement. So ignoring what I've done up here, let's just say I've got an idea like this. I've got it all written out. I've got a few ideas. I've got intro, verse, chorus, but I'm not sure how to really arrange them like I've done here. Well, really easy thing we can do is pull in a song onto a new track and copy out the arrangement. So we might be like, okay, we've got the intro here. That's cool. So we're going to move the marker over here for our song. We've got the chorus. And that's sped up a lot, it's warped. And the chorus goes on for quite a while. And then we come into the bridge. And so on and so on. And so that's what you're doing. You're listening to your reference track and you're defining the arrangement. And then what you can do is plan out your MIDI clips. So I've got my intro here. I'm going to have my chorus over here, and so on and so on. Now, the objection to this, which I get a lot, is, isn't that just copying? Isn't that stealing? What about being creative? Well, here's the thing. When it comes to structure and arrangement, in electronic music especially, you don't need to worry about copying or stealing someone's arrangement because most of them are the same. You don't need to innovate when it comes to structure and arrangement. That's what I'm basically saying. You don't need to innovate there because listeners expect something familiar. If you're going to do a 7-bar intro, 4-bar chorus, and then 48-bar bridge, that's not going to work well. It's going to confuse the listener. They're probably going to stop listening. So stick to a well-known, used, common arrangement, and you'll benefit from that. So again, you listen to a reference track, you copy out this arrangement. You can even go as far, if you want, as to copy out the instrumentation. So I might listen to this and think, oh, they've got a vocal chop. I've got to add one of those in. They've got a kick and a snare. And so you're just adding in these tracks because you're going to fill them in later. The downside to that is that you can end up being very, very influenced by the song. So I recommend, if you're doing this, to delete the reference track as soon as you've got these in place so that you don't create something too similar. And then fill it in really quickly. Just get sounds in, get them in. You can tweak them later. You want to get your song in a place where you can listen to it and go, this is taking shape. I'm at about 80%. I can replace a few samples, a few sounds, and then I'll be good. Okay, so that is the video breakdown of this strategy. I talked about a few other things. We looked at how to build good chord progressions and melodies. We looked at how to take ideas, a simple idea, and turn it into multiple. And we just looked at the shortcut to a good arrangement. But now I want to answer a few questions. So the first one is, how do I know when my idea is good enough? Hard question to answer because it's different for everyone. The first thing I would say is sometimes you just know, you just feel it, right? I think we've all kind of felt that as producers. We've been working on something, we're like, this is good. This is good. I'm going to move on with this. But if you're a new producer, especially, it can be difficult to know when this is. Mostly because your ear or your skill isn't developed enough to discern whether the idea is good and worth pursuing or not. My advice to you, if you're in this position, if you're a newer producer and you can't really feel it, is to just move forward with it anyway. Just finish the song, do it as fast as you can, and then move on to the next song. And the reason for this is quantity over quality. I've talked about this a lot over the years, but as a new producer, you should be making a lot of music. A lot of it will not sound good. A lot of it will be bad. But that is how you get good. Quantity over quality. Don't spend 6 months on your first song. That is a huge waste of time. Make 1 song a week. Make 2 songs a week if you can. That's what I was doing in the early days. That's what a lot of people I talk to, professional producers, recommend. Quantity over quality. The other thing when it comes to wondering if your idea is good enough to move forward, ask other people. If you've got other producer friends, awesome. Just ask them for some feedback. Do you think this is a good idea or do you think it sucks? Be totally honest. Ask them to be totally honest with you. The next question is, I don't know how to write down ideas that excite me. Any advice? So the first thing I would recommend is to remake other music. If you're in this phase where the stuff you're putting down doesn't excite you, that's normal, it happens. Spend some time developing your skills, remake other music, drag a song in like this, and then just do your best to replicate it. It'll be hard. And that's why most people listening to this or watching this video will not take my advice, even though I think it is the best way to improve as a producer. What will happen when you do this is it will make you excited. You'll come across things that make you excited. You'll discover how they've used them, and then you'll want to use them in your own original music. The second recommendation I have is to make a list of songs, your favorite songs that make you feel excited, that make you feel something. And then write down what elements they possess that make you like them. So maybe it's the synth they've used for the melody. Maybe it's the drum beat or the snare. Whatever it is, write it down and then use these elements and styles in your own music. Finally, develop an idea generation habit. So you're consistently generating new ideas every day. Maybe it's 30 minutes a day. You sit down and you just try and write 5 ideas. Maybe it's a melody, a drum beat, whatever. And even if 10% of these 5 ideas excite you, that's still 3 to 4 solid ideas per week. Maybe one of those turns into a song. So it's a good habit to develop. 30 minutes a day, maybe a bit longer. Give it a go. Okay, the final question is, I can come up with a loop that really excites me, but how do I get out of it? So we've kind of talked about avoiding the loop trap, but what if you're stuck in the loop trap, but you've got a really good idea and you want to finish it? You don't just want to avoid it. Well, the first thing I would recommend is the subtractive arrangement approach. So let's say we've got this loop and we're finding it really hard to develop. Well, what we could do is just force ourselves out of it by duplicating it out and then trying to figure out the arrangement. So we might be like, well, I'm not going to have the drums in this section or this section. Probably not going to have a bass line there either. It's going to be like a breakdown section. I will be having effects though. The chords won't come until the second part. So you do something like that. And again, if you get stuck, you can just reference another arrangement. That would be the first approach. Doesn't always work, but worth doing. The second approach is to make a B section. So instead of duplicating this out, we might take this loop and then we might make a B section. And so we might change the drum beat, or we might change the bass line significantly, or the chords, or everything. But making sure it still kind of fits with this. It's not a completely different song. There's still some similarities. This forces you to think and listen outside of your loop. And it makes it a lot easier to start to develop your track. Because now you can be like, well, I've got 2 chorus sections. Or I could use this as a verse as a B section. And the final approach I recommend is more of a mental one. It's to think about what would naturally follow from this. And so you're listening to your loop and you think, you know what? It would be nice if a soft pad sound followed from this into the breakdown. That would really work well. And then you kind of think about what kind of sound what would it sound like. Let's look through some presets. Likewise, think about what would come before your loop. What kind of build would you have into your loop? How intense does that build up need to be? Start building it. I think that's one of the easiest things to do if you've got a loop. Just make some space. You can Command I in Ableton, insert 16 bars, and then just build the build up into it. And now you're forming your arrangement. You're not just stuck in this loop anymore. So again, approach 1, duplicate, remove stuff, subtractive arrangement. Number 2, make a B section, something that's different significantly, but still similar. And the third approach is to think about what would come after your loop and before your loop. Hope this video helped. If you have any questions, just send me an email, reply to this email. Next week, I'm going to send you a step-by-step guide on how to use this strategy in detail. There'll also be a checklist for you, which you can use as you work on your own music. So yeah, that's me out. Happy producing, and I'll see you later.